right here. And this right here is what I would classify as the most important figure within inside of the whole of Islam. And without this figure, there would not be an Islam. So, I want to go into this figure. I want to go into this figure right here. Because, how can I say this? If we don't go into this figure and we don't ascertain who this figure is, we will never really understand how Islam actually originated. Now, according to the Islamic story, there was a particular Ethiopian king. You can't get better well known than a king. You can't be better well attested than a king. The most powerful individuals within side of history are always kings and emperors. Basically. Maybe generals as well. Okay? So now we have to ascertain a particular king inside of history. If inside of the Islamic history, we know, their story literally starts. I mean, literally starts. Actually, let's go there. Actually, it literally starts. If you know anything about the letters of Urwa ibn al-Zubayr, the very first letter that was ever written to the king, which was Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik was asking questions to Urwa, who was he was the brother to a caliph, actually. He was the brother to basically another king. But he was asking questions about Muhammad. And this is the very first letter. So this is like the origins, basically, of the making of Muhammad, where the court was constructing the narrative and imagery of Muhammad. It says here, when the when that befell the Muslims, the messenger of God commanded them to depart the land of Abyssinia. In Abyssinia, there was a righteous king called the Negus. No one was oppressed in his land, and because of that, word of his righteousness spread. The land of Abyssinia was a destination for trade, the quarries would conduct business, and where they had found a lucrative livelihood, safety, and a fair market. So the messenger of God commanded them to go there. Most of them went there. They found themselves belligerent in Mecca. When they found themselves belligerent in Mecca, he feared what the trials of persecution at the fitan would do to him, but he himself remained impartial. So, in terms of the making of the Prophet Muhammad of Islam, the very first from the top and down was letters produced to give everybody a narrative of Muhammad. And the first that you are introduced to, apart from Muslims and apart from Muhammad, is an Abyssinian king called the Negus. This anonymous king, because if you know anything about the Ethiopian language, Negus So Najashi just means king, right? But the proper terminology that people think about is the emperor, which is the Nagashi. Basically, the king of kings is the emperor. So most people confuse the emperor with the Abyssinian word for king, Najashi or Negus. So we know that Muhammad's followers supposedly went to Abyssinia, to this king, this anonymous king that we know nothing about. But today, we're going to figure out who this anonymous king is to demonstrate how, back to the thesis, of how a Christian Prophet Muhammad was appropriated into the Islamic Muhammad. We're going to go into that. Okay? So, but before we do that, I actually want to jump a little bit. Okay? I want to jump because we're definitely going to talk about the story of the Negus. But we need to go back. And I need to set the stage for you guys. And me setting the stage, I want you guys to just sit back and watch little videos so I can set the stage. Okay? Let's do that.
It was really in the mid 4th century that Christianity entered the region properly, when the Aksumite king Azama accepted the faith and made it the official religion of the kingdom. This spread of Christianity was also strengthened by an increasing number of missionaries, monks, and other teachers and saints coming to the region and set up there. One of the most significant of these was Frumentius, also known endearingly as Abba Salama, father of peace, and Kasate Berhan, the bringer of light. Originally from Tyre in modern-day Lebanon, Frumentius was sold as a slave to Ethiopia. He was eventually freed and then began teaching Christianity. Realizing that the region was ripe for the faith, he eventually traveled to Alexandria in Egypt, studied with Athanasius, and asked for a bishop to be appointed to Ethiopia in order to properly make it part of the wider church. Instead, Athanasius appointed Frumentius himself to bishop and sent him back to Ethiopia, where he became the first patriarch or head of the Ethiopian church, referred to locally as the Abuna, literally meaning our father. This started a long-standing relationship that is at the core of not only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but the kingdom as a whole. The double authority of the king and Abuna.
This is the key part, the double authority of the king and Abuna. I want that. That's like the key information I want to get into you guys' heads before we proceed.
Being the secular leader, and the latter, of course, the religious, but always in an essential and important relationship. Indeed, both the king and Abuna, for most of history, traced their authority back into the sacred past. In terms of the Abuna, this is obvious, as they see themselves as representing an apostolic religious authority going back to the apostles of Christ. But for the king, his authority stretches back even further, even to the core stories of the Old Testament. This sacred history is most famously and significantly captured in the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings, a kind of national epic of Ethiopia that tells the story of the country's direct connection and interaction with the biblical kings and prophets. There is disagreement about when this epic was actually written, or at least compiled, with scholars today arguing for it dating in the Middle Ages, in the 13th century. But certainly the stories contained therein might go back to oral traditions from long before. The Kibra Nagas tells the famous story of the Queen of Sheba, an Ethiopian warrior who goes to visit King Solomon in Jerusalem. In this version, the two actually have a son, Menelik, who later returns to Jerusalem as an adult, announces himself to his father, and eventually makes his way back to Ethiopia with the very Ark of the Covenant, the sacred ark that houses the tablets containing the Ten Commandments. Menelik then becomes the first king of Ethiopia, inaugurating the so-called Solomonic dynasty that basically all kings for most of history up until very recently claimed to be a part of. The stories told in the Kibra Nagas thus have several important functions. It gives authority to the kings of Ethiopia by connecting them directly with King Solomon. It also explains how the Ark of the Covenant came to be in the possession of the Ethiopian Church, a topic that we will return to. And it also explains the entrance of Judaism into Ethiopia, a fact that is also very important for this wider story. Indeed, Judaism seems to have been present in the kingdom for a long time, and given the fact that the Ethiopians are a Semitic people in terms of language, both in terms of the liturgical language Ge'ez and the majority spoken language called Amharic. This all connects Ethiopia to the wider Semitic biblical stories and lineages in several ways, which becomes very important for their national identity and for the church itself. So the king and the Abuna, the patriarch, are at the top of the hierarchy from this time and for most of history. And the story about Frumentius going to Egypt to be appointed bishop is also the beginning of a long tradition. Indeed, from this time forward, all Abunas in Ethiopia were appointed and sent from the church in Egypt, which eventually became the Coptic church. This is the practice that continued from this time all the way into the 20th century. In fact, the relationship between the Coptic church and the Ethiopian has been so strong and essential that the latter has sometimes been seen as simply an extension of, as a diocese of the church in Egypt. And this also, of course, comes with certain doctrinal factors. So, what are the characteristic teachings that set the Ethiopian church apart? Well, just like the Coptic church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a so-called non-Chalcedonian or pre-Chalcedonian church. What does this mean? To tell you more about the details of this Christological debate, here is the scholar of religion, Dr. Andrew Henry, from the YouTube channel Religion for Breakfast.
One of the central theological debates of the
That's all I'm saying. See this whole channel right here? Big channel. Big channel. You guys should go check it out, actually. So I wanted to lay the foundation because what they're about to go into was going to be like so deep. It's for like a second show right there, because that really goes into the history of this particular Muhammad that we're talking about. Okay, and what do I mean by this? In both stories of the Christian Muhammad and the Muslim Muhammad, they're both inextricably linked to an Ethiopian king. Why is that? Both their stories start off with an Ethiopian king. Why is that? The answer is because the highest authority within inside of Ethiopian controlled empires is the king and his Abuna. He's king, the king, and he's Abuna, or the king and his bishop, or the king and his archbishop. whatever you want to call it. Okay? Those are the two most important figures. One exerts legal or how can I put it? The physical material world, like that's the state, the spiritual state belongs to the Abuna. This is the importance of it. And if we don't know the history, we will completely lose sight of why it was important. And the historiographers had to link these two individuals together. Once you understand the history, you'll understand the importance of it. Once you understand where it was about to go to, which was to do with the pre-Chalcedonian creeds and so forth, you will understand in history there was a breaking away from Ethiopian orthodoxy by Abraham. And that breaking away meant that he's no longer tied to the Egyptian church, but he constructed and created his new form of Christianity, which therefore needed a bishop or an archbishop in terms of an abuna. Okay, it needed that to create its own new form of religion and its new form of Christianity and its new system that was in place in terms of hierarchy as well. Right? But I think I'm going to leave that for another show because that there entails, how can I put it? That entails Syriac, Byzantine, Arabic, and other literature sources. And I don't want to muddle the pond. I want to just keep it kind of Islamic, kind of show you where Islam has it. So if my Muslims are watching, they'll be like, yeah, we can take from that. But if I start bringing in Syriac stuff, they might be like, I don't know about that, fam. I don't know about that. So yeah, let's go into this, okay? So I just really want to get you into your head about these two powers and why it's important that both stories had a prophet linked to a Ethiopian king. Now,
This is your brain when you're
that cut you up in here with me, okay? So, now when we go into the story of the Negusa, I want to do this now. So this is Islamic stuff now. The Islamic side of stuff, they tell us about this particular king, okay? They tell us about this king. They tell us the basic outline of the story of the Negus is that, of course, he's a king. There was a particular rebel. No, let's start from the beginning. It's number two, actually. He was sold into slavery by a merchant in Ethiopia that was doing boating. He was sold into slavery. Wow. A king that was sold into slavery. He got emancipated or, freed and became the king. Sometime within inside of his reign, a rebel arose. The Muslims were in fright of this rebel that arose, but he was able to defeat that rebel. Unfortunately, I spelled that wrong. I don't know how. There was a particular Christological uproar, according to the Muslim story, to do with the sonship of Jesus. So the people revolted until he calmed them down by saying, I do believe what you believe in, basically. And we know that through Islamic history as well, that he was a righteous king. He was a righteous king. Now, of course, all of this stuff here is inside. Yeah, it's inside of let's take away my head. Off with his head. 1 second. Again, because I know a lot of you guys will be asking for the sources, and I like to just give you the primary source of all of this stuff. So if you literally go to page 152 of Ibn Isak's Sirah Rasulullah, you will literally find the story of the Negus. Okay? You will literally find the story how the Negus became king of Abyssinia, which is, yeah, there, you know, boom, boom, boom. You know, talking about a particular revolt that took place. A rebel tried to, that arose, tried to snatch his kingdom away from him. So they took him in the market and sold him to a merchant for 600 dirhams. They later threw him into a boat and went off with him. On the very evening, the autumn storm clouds mass. His uncle went out to pray, blah, 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 blah. They brought him back, put the crown on his head, made him sit upon the throne and proclaimed him king. You know, oh, king, I was born, blah, 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 blah. You know, the Christological stuff over here. I cannot believe it. Christological stuff over here, anyway. Can I not bring it? Nope. It's not allowed me to do it, unfortunately. There you go. You're forsaking our religion, said that Jesus is slave, Jesus say that he's the Son of God, etc., etc. So the basic outline of this particular king is within inside of the Syrian literature. Okay? So anything that I've said so far, I'm not going to be, you know, you can't say, oh, Kalam is just making it up. No, it's there within inside of it. Okay? So these are the basic stories, basic facts that we know about this particular king. Now, in that being said, let me just get my actual image up. 1 second, bear with me. Of this particular anonymous king within inside of the history of Islam. But if this story is true, can we find this anonymous king within inside of history? Because if he's a king, surely there's documentation about him. And the answer to this is, yeah, we can. We can. And it's a king. It's a king. Let's go into this. Let's go into this a little bit. Let's go into this. I want to start off with the most easiest one. Because my demonstration to you guys today is to demonstrate that this anonymous king that's been spoken about within inside of Islamic history, that nobody can't pin down. Nobody can't pin down. Muslims, let me do it like this. Muslims will tell you about this Christian king. But there is nothing within inside of history of, like, Christians would be like, Ethiopian Christians would be like, what are you talking about? There's no such king. You know, nobody, like, we never brought you guys in. Like, Christians, Ethiopian Christians, they don't have any story about this. And the reason why they don't have any story about this, because this never happened on Ethiopia mainland. That's the real reason. And it never happened during the time frame that the Muslims, historiographers, this happened during the reign of King Abraham. And this happened with not with the Muslim prophet, but with the Christian prophet, Muhammad. And we're going to just demonstrate that today. So, in Precipitous, History of the Wars. Let me see if I can bring it up actually. Because I want to give you guys this stuff. Let me see if I can share my screen. Bear with me. There you go. So I'm going to do it like this so you guys can actually go and find it yourself. I have to just move my head. Right. There you go. Cool. So you guys can literally go and find it yourself. Right? It's called Precipitous of Caesarea, History of the Wars. You guys can literally go, yeah. But right now, Google it and you can find it. Precipitous with an English translation by H.B. Dewey. Okay? I'm not going to give you guys anything that you can't find. History of the Wars, page 191. Okay? And you will find this right there. Okay? It says here, now this Ambrose was a Christian, but a slave of a Roman citizen who was engaged in the business of shipping in the city of Bulundu in Ethiopia. Stop for a second. They're talking about Abraham here, by the way. Okay? Abraham's story is, according to Precipitous of Caesarea, written in Greek, written in 550 AD, roughly, circa 550 AD. Let me just quickly make sure I am correct in saying that by giving you this. Let's quickly Google that. Yeah. So by latest 565, but I'm pretty sure that they said it was 550 when he actually wrote this. Okay. So in writing this about a particular king, particular Nicholas, he says here he was a Christian, but a slave of a Roman citizen who was engaged in the business of shipping in the city of Bulundu in Ethiopia. This is Abraham. This is Abraham. Now, the Ethiopian king of Islam is said to be what? Is said to be what? Let's quickly get it again. He was in his country. They took him to the market and sold him to a merchant for 600 dirhams that later threw him into a boat and went off with him, but on that very evening. Hold on, let me just make sure it's there so you guys can see. So you can see, this is talking about right now, the Islamic Prophet Muhammad's king, who was sold into slavery to a merchant in Ethiopia who dealt with boating. But the historical records, talking about Abraham, is said to be a Christian who was sold as a slave to a Roman citizen who was engaged in business or shipping in the city of Bulundu in Ethiopia. Now, my thing to you guys is, what's the odds of two Ethiopian kings in the space of 10, 20 years apart from each other, 30 years apart from each other, that were sold into slavery to a Roman merchant who dealt with boating in Ethiopia? What are the odds? If you want to tell me that these are two different kings, that could be the response. Oh, these are two different kings. But what are the odds that these two different kings share the same story? What are the odds that these two different kings are also said to have a prophet by their side? To have a prophet, not simply a prophet, but a prophet called Muhammad by their side. What are the odds of that? I don't know. You tell me in it. Like, you tell me. I do want to actually bring out the rest of it because we can show you as well, you know, the same story. We can go into the archaeology. We can find out that, oh yes, we have the same story of a rebel that tried to take over. We're going into history now. This is history.